Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this segment of the Energy Jurist. With me is my honored guest, Mr. George Etomi Esq, and we will be breaking down the oil and gas sector 2025. So just a brief introduction. Mr. George Etomi Esq is the managing partner of George Etomi and Partners here in Nigeria with branches in Port Harcourt, Lagos, and Abuja. He also serves as a director at West Power and Gas Limited, and he has over 42 years experience in corporate and commercial law practice here in Nigeria. He's an invaluable expert on all energy matters and honestly a professional I deeply, deeply respect. You're welcome, sir.
My pleasure. Make my call 47 years.
Oh, forgive me, sir. 47 years, sir. 47 years, sir. Thank you for that clarification, sir. All right. So, like I mentioned earlier, we'll be reviewing the subject matter Nigeria in 2025, gas, refineries, and foreign investments. Now, sir, for our first subject matter, we're talking about gas exportation. Nigeria is one of the top gas exporters in the world. I believe it's ranked sixth currently in Africa. And in the first quarter of 2024, the country was able to export a total of 1.6 trillion cubic meters of gas, which amounts to 1.26 billion in US dollars. Now, Nigeria has the opportunity to export this gas to African countries, but also there is an opportunity now to send it beyond the continent. Now, we are seeing issues in Europe where the Ukraine and Russia deal is no longer viable. And as things currently stand, there is no hope of renewal. That opens up a world of opportunity. We have market players like the United States. We're hearing about gas supply from areas such as Greece. Is there an opportunity for Nigeria to tap into this gap and provide the gas that Europe desperately needs?
Absolutely. There is an opportunity for Nigeria in the gas industry. In fact, I think, if I recall, we actually have more deposits of gas than even crude oil. We've just concentrated over several years on crude oil and done very little to develop our gas reserves. That's actually why we're lagging behind. If you look at export figures, we export largely to Europe, and we are second behind Algeria. That's responsible for 10% of Europe's gas imports. Nigeria has a mere 4.2% and dropping for that matter because we're not investing in more of these gas fields. So, and like you rightly mentioned, with the crisis in Ukraine, which is not going to go away in a hurry, we have a very fine opportunity to increase that level of export. But before we do that, we must ensure that we begin to look at the things we've been neglecting over the years, which is how do we create the gas infrastructure that will enable us increase our gas production. That's really where the challenge has been. And as you probably also are aware, we now have more domestic players, and
Yes.
a lot of hope is being placed on these domestic players to fill the gap where most of these IOCs are withdrawing. Again, it's also understandable. Gas export in Nigeria is mainly in the form of LNG. And as it's structured today, it's being pushed by the IOCs, Shell with Shell leading the way. So most of them export our gas to meet their own energy needs. So, and then we get our dividends, we get paid for the raw gas, very little value added. So if we begin to look more towards Africa, we can also see that huge opportunities exist in Africa. The African Continental Free Trade Area has essentially taken off. I was at the Apapa port a few months ago, where the first set of shipment of goods took place, which symbolically signified the start of intra-African trade according to the dreams of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So I don't see why we cannot tap into that. We just created an Africa Energy Bank to deal with issues to do with financing for the oil and gas sector. And as you know, there isn't too much appetite for crude oil financing in Europe or in the West, generally speaking. But there's a lot for gas. So the Africa Energy Bank's entry into energy financing could make a huge difference, because what most of our players, local players, need is access to capital. The know-how is here, and I'm actually proud to say that from a mere 5% of market share for crude oil production in Nigeria, local producers are doing close to 30% today. And that number can only continue to go up, because most of the onshore fields abandoned by the IOCs have been taken up, snapped up, and many of them that were capped are actually producing in huge volumes that were never anticipated. Yes. And more of that can come. Community issues that have been a major problem is being dealt with by these local producers, and that's understandable. They will understand and deal with those environmental and community issues that have plagued production. So that's also understandable. So the outlook for 2025, if you ask me, I would say that with some moderate caution, is positive, provided, the big proviso there is that the government should do what it should do. Ensure you have a legal and regulatory environment that creates a level playing field. We must reduce the graft that with which the sector is globally known for, and that can be done. We can begin to look at how we can incentivize most local producers. I know some producers who struggled to work their wells, but with massive support from NNPC, who is the major joint venture partner in most of these local outfits. NNPC supported them, and most of them are doing very, very, very good production. On the regulatory side, we're seeing a lot of good work too, since the PIA came into existence and the breaking up of the mighty DPR into component parts. We're seeing active work with the NUPRC, the upstream regulator, and even the midstream to downstream regulators. There's greater professionalism, there's more appraisal that's going on, and more discussions around, oh, what's your problem? How can we help you? Which is very, very friendly talk for investors. So you now find an appetite. And even when the last big rounds took place, you would have noticed that most of the bidders were local bidders. You would have, people thought they could judge the failure or success of the bid rounds by the number of foreign takers. That for me is not the measure. That for me is not the measure at all. The measure is how we can support the local bidders, because we have an interest to create our own energy security. And I have been around for quite a while. Even if you depart from oil and gas, you think about what the banking sector did to revolutionize banking. The challenge was actually taken up by Nigerians. Mm-hmm. Most of the foreign banks at the time did not participate, and they all left. Your Barclays, your First Chicago, Chase, they all left. And the banking sector is one of the most vibrant. If you leave that and go to telecoms, yes, okay, some foreigners came in, the MTNs and co, but the operations are likely run by Nigerians today. And together they've achieved a telephony penetration of over 180 million subscribers from a paltry 700,000 in the days of the mighty Nitel. So it can tell you And then if you shift to the aviation sector, from the almighty Nigeria Airways, we are not where we should be with aviation, but it's a huge departure from what it used to be.
Yes.
You have choices with several local airlines with strict regulation. Now, many of them are beginning to be alive to the passenger requirements, and the sector is becoming vibrant. So for me, I'm an incurable optimist, but my optimism is based on history.
Yes.
And I've taken the pains to give you this history to let you know that if we look inward, we can actually find solutions to a lot of our problems.
Yes.
The latest, of course, is the power sector.
Yes.
The power sector. That too hasn't reached where we want it to be. But from 12 years ago when it was privatized, Nigerians are far more knowledgeable about the dynamics in that sector. So you now know about gas, you know about generation, you know about transmission, distribution, renewables, and all the other things. Knowledge, they say, is power.
Yes.
And so many people are coming into these spaces. And give it another decade or so, we will take the power issue for granted.
Yes,
yes, it could have come well before these other major reforms, but like I said, the best time to do something was 5 years ago, but the next best time is today.
Yes, sir.
So again, I'm optimistic that we have a bright future.
That's all right, sir. Thank you, sir. So on our next segment now, that is the refineries. There have been doubts because the refineries in Nigeria, sometimes they work and then sometimes they close down. The Port Harcourt refinery closed some years back for two major reasons. One, it was undergoing repairs, and then secondly, there was very low crude oil supply to it. So now it's back up and running. At last report, it's about to 60% capacity running and it's producing 60,000 barrels per day. If we add that and also consider the Dangote refinery, which is producing an average of 650,000 barrels per day, if you consider the Warri refinery as well, it seems that Nigeria is on a good run. The refinery situation is looking better. But at the same time, we don't want to have Nigerians in a situation where they witness refineries go up again, and then after some years, everything stalls once more. So what are the measures that can be put in place to ensure that Nigerians are not given false refinery hopes again, and that the current refineries can keep running and producing and refining the oil at the best possible rate?
I'll tell you a very interesting story. Incidentally, my mom comes from Okrika, where the first refinery, this very refinery talking about, the smaller one that's producing.
Yes.
When it was first built, I was then in standard. It used to be standard. I think it was standard 3. I can't remember.
Okay.
And we went on an excursion to the refinery. It looked like pure heaven, to be honest. You know, we saw all the massive thing. It took us round. They told us what it was going to do. And then finally, we ended up in a boardroom where they were letting us understand and ask a Q&A session type of thing. I still remember very clearly as a kid, I was asking the white guy who was asking all the questions, okay, so you built this sort of very nice place. What is the plan for the people around the area? How do they benefit? And he was like, oh, that's a very good question. Then he went on to read out whatever it was at that time, the plans they had to lift the people on from the area.
Yes.
Fast forward, I'm 70 this year. I don't know how old I was then. What I see today, is it anywhere close to the expectation I had when, as a primary school boy, I was asking that question? The answer is a mighty no. And the reasons are not too far-fetched. One, we don't have a maintenance culture. You build something, we spend so much energy building something, and then we don't maintain it. It's not just for the refineries, It's true for your roads. It's true for government buildings. It's quicker for us to put budget items to build something new than to maintain. So the refinery got hit by that. Secondly, the community policy was very poor. We still see it today. In fact, what everybody looked in those days upon as salvation for the people around the area has turned out to be a curse, which is why they call it the oil curse. And whilst people like my grandparents, my parents and grandparents took it in their stride, the younger ones are not really willing to see that. They saw many of their forebears become non-persons, displaced from their traditional profession of fishing and doing other things, and then displaced by people who got oil block allocations that went into their farmlands or into their fishing territories without absolutely no plan for their future. So is there any surprise that we have the level of unrest and more damning distrust? And that's really what it is like. So whilst to answer the question, how do we deal with this disappointment? We have to go back to the drawing board. First, I believe government should progressively get out of it based on the reasons I gave to you in the past. If you imagine if the banking sector was still dominated by, was it First Bank, Union Bank, UBA, the government banks in those days, do you think the banking sector would be what it is today? If NITEL was the main player in telecoms, you think we'll be where we are today? We've seen that with the NEPA, we see that with Nigeria Airways. So what's so sacrosanct about the oil and gas industry? Privatize the downstream. Let competition be the hallmark of how we make progress in that area. And I can tell you, create a competition, many of these problems we're talking about will disappear. Even today, as we speak, those local producers who have come into the oil and gas sector are taking better care of the communities than the IOCs. I mean, I'm not going to go into why the IOCs didn't do it, because if you question them, they will tell you government said, no, leave it, it is our responsibility. Government says it's yours, we pay 90% by way of taxes, we shouldn't be doing those things. You can give me all the reasons you want, but the end result is that it has been a massive disappointment for those people from the area. So going forward, if you deal with this, this is all before I come to the technical issue. Okay. If you deal with the human side, the technical side will then take more effect. Otherwise, you can build all those fine edifices they took us on an excursion to go and see, and then the end result is waste and aggravation. Today, as perhaps you know, there's talk now to revive the Ogoni land thing based on the cleanup and all the other arrangements that are going on. And I'm really hoping that they not only take the people along, but they give them concrete and achievable plans about how renewed exploration of oil and gas activities will benefit the people. Let's start with that, the human element. Then we go to the technical side, which is the maintenance culture I talked about. I mean, if you know how much has been voted in turnaround maintenance for all these moribund refineries, you'll be staggered. I'm sure you know till today, budget items include what they pay to staff who are not even working on a daily basis, because we know most of those refineries have been decommissioned for so long. And then, and this turnaround maintenance, they come in the billions. So it's a little bit perplexing that it is only when the Dangote refinery came into action, and then we got this public spectacle of disagreement between them and NNPC that we suddenly now see that all our refineries are beginning to crank back into life. I don't know what to make of it, but it gives you a sneak preview of what competition can do for an industry. NNPC suddenly is on its toes. Dangote Refinery too is on its toes. I like the idea, but they too should compete like everybody else, because ultimately we do these things for the benefit of society and make profit in the process. But it should never be society go to hell and let I just get rich at your expense. Because the reason you don't clean up is so you maximize your profit. The reason you don't maintain is so you maximize it. So that is for minimum input, you want maximum benefit. So a lot begins with, like I said, the human element, the attitude. Then, of course, we have to deal with this issue of maintenance culture. And then privatization, as I've said, should be the ultimate goal. Let's look, if the federal government freed itself of all its attempt to foray into businesses and sell down on some of its assets, one, they will make huge monies to shore up our forex reserve, which is what is hurting us so badly with regard to foreign exchange scarcity. And at the same time, it will just sort of fold its hands, sharpen its tax regime, create incentives for new investments, and then just raking the benefits. We are seeing it in telecoms. I mean, when government owned 100% NITEL, they were subsidizing NITEL. Mm-hmm. But today, with not a single share in any of the major telecoms communication companies, they are raking in incredible sums. Nigeria's GDP increased to the largest in Africa. It growth on the back of the telecoms revolution, until unfortunately this crash in our Naira and co. So we have seen several examples of how government can just, government is the super regulator.
Yes.
You are the super tax collector. You are the everything. So why don't you just sort of invest in those areas and allow those who can do the businesses go do them, and then you tax them, and then you in turn provide even more incentives for greater exploration. Mm-hmm. Anyway, like I said, the best time to do something was 5 years ago. The next best time is today. So if we go back to the drawing board and we do these things, I see a positive trajectory. Mm-hmm. And talking about positive trajectory, I must say that a lot of the big ticket issues that the present administration has had to deal with have been carryover issues, indecisiveness. PIA took 20 years to deal with. In that process, the oil market changed significantly. And it was not as if we were not warned that it was going to happen. So we should learn from that. There's a tax reform bill on the table that's been opposed now. Instead of throwing the baby with the bathwater, I would say look at something that's evidently going to change the tax landscape for the better. Yes. In Nigeria. Deal with the political issues, but please don't throw the baby with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. If we truncate this exercise, we'll hurt ourselves and come back to realize 20 years later, oh, we should have done this 20 years ago. So I think we should learn from history. If you look at the mineral space, that's another area where there's been so much wastage and has massive potential for Nigeria, over close to $750 billion in untapped assets all over the country, from gold to uranium to lithium to you just name it, all over the place, but being dealt with in ungoverned manner. So the crooks are here, they are cutting away your minerals, making a few people stupendously wealthy, leaving the pollution and unrest behind, because a lot of this so-called banditry in the north, if you go investigate properly, is tied to these illegal mining activities. So if the government can just concentrate on regulation and just bring about certainty in our laws and in governance, which includes policing and all the other things, security generally speaking, I think we will have an upward projectile in our revenue base. and therefore in the standard of living of Nigerians. That's my worry, standard of living of Nigerians.
Yes, sir.
Many Nigerians today are actually dying poorer than they were so many years ago, which is an indictment and which we should not allow. On top of which, we must also not mortgage the future of the younger generation.
Yes, sir.
They have a stake too. Bring them into the picture. We can't continue to act as if they don't exist or that they should be silenced because they are protesting. There's so much as we can see they've done for us. They can do even more. Look at what they've done with the entertainment industry. Look at what they're doing with the digital space. Look at what they're doing with IT, generally speaking. I'm glad the youth conference is being called. I hope there are no political undertones to that. But if it's a youth conference, just purely to engage the youth for them to participate in how they can shape this country for themselves, it would be a fantastic thing. Because unlike many of us who've gone past, many youths don't really care about where you come from. They don't care about your tribe. They don't care about your religion. They want to deal with you on its merits. And we need that very plenty. Sadly, our politicians have not been the best of examples when it comes to separating these mundane things from the activities that actually create and make us leaders of the Black race. We forget the role Nigeria should be playing in this global race for excellence, that we are not just living for ourselves. We're a veritable example to the Black race, and we should not let that side down. What we've shown so far is huge, and I think we can build on it.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much for that, sir. So to our final segment, which is the IOCs and essentially the sales that we witnessed towards the end of 2024, because we witnessed sales of assets from ExxonMobil, we saw Ajib, we saw Equinor, and the tragic thing about these sales is they aren't exactly leaving the continent. It's not a case of the IOCs losing faith in the African continent and saying, you know what, let's go to Europe, let's go to America and do business. They are basically transferring their interests to other African nations. We can see them in Angola, we can see them in Cote d'Ivoire, you can see them in Ghana. So what exactly are we doing wrong in Nigeria? Because we've had this issue for years now. IOC is complaining, oh, we can't stay here because the regulatory situation is unstable. The government is not having a continuity mindset. Everything changes when power changes hands. So what exactly are we doing wrong in the oil and gas sector? And how can we find a way to attract this foreign investment, attract these IOCs back, and also ensure that they do the right things? Because we don't want them to come back and repeat the same mistakes that they have been making over time, but we also want them to come in and essentially contribute to the development of our sector.
Look, let me say one thing from the outset. IOCs, Nigeria, other African countries, it's your interest that drives your activities. Okay. The IOCs are not here to come and make you feel good. Most of them are an extension of their home government's interest in energy security. And that's why you see them looking around globally where energy stocks exist and they go there to invest. It's to secure the energy future.
Yes.
I'm sure you're following the argument going around now with regard to Greenland.
Yes, sir.
Yes, the threat by Trump to annex it and all that.
Yes.
It's always a posturing for energy security. So everybody's looking for their own interest. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't lose sleep about the IOCs. By the way, they're not leaving your deep sea blocks. They're not. They're only leaving your onshore blocks, mm-hmm. which is fine. And I articulated the reason why it is better for us. We've seen actually a massive increase in our oil and gas production. Yep. Since they downloaded, if I can use that word, to Nigerian investors. Yep. And it's positive. So I'm not going to lose sleep over it. They're living for other African countries, but please, let's put things in perspective. When it comes to working in the oil and gas industry, I don't think you can do better than Nigerians. Even those African countries should actually shape their policies such that they are not wholly exploited. Yes. If they don't, in the process of welcoming these IOCs, develop indigenous capacity, they will regret it. I was at an upstream West African oil and gas workshop a few years ago in Senegal, when Senegal, like many of the West African countries, discovered oil and coal. And I just bluntly told them, yeah, we made mistakes in Nigeria. African countries don't have to repeat our mistakes. You can leapfrog some of the things we did. For example, many of us planned for oil and gas. We didn't plan for power. They're all related. We planned for oil and gas. We didn't plan for power. So you have gas, but you don't have power. That's a massive irony. So when you want to, as part of your energy security, just ensure that there is sufficient gas to work your domestic consumption needs, because in the end, that's what drives your industries. Why should we export oil and gas in their raw forms, only to go and import them in their finished forms and pay significantly higher from little forex we've made from selling them in their crude form? So there's a need to develop indigenous capacity. And I think that's where the oil and gas industry is moving to in Nigeria. As to the capital, which is what you are saying,
yes, sir.
Capital is driven largely by, let me say, policy shifts by financial institutions. Many of them favor, they're looking at renewables, they're looking for alternative sources of gas. So many of them are not giving you money for crude oil. They'll give you for gas as a transition fuel. But you've got to, we need it. If we, in fact, we get sufficient crude oil to work our refineries, it's better for us. It means we don't have to spend scarce foreign exchange importing finished products. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge plus. And there'll be a big hive of economic activities. Your petrochemical industry will ensure that you have all the raw materials you require for industrial growth. Yes. So we can look inward. We have the brains. That's not the problem. We have the brains. The major drawback here is government, because government policy is inconsistent. You are correct. A government comes in, they totally turn their back on B government. The government is succeeded for whatever reason. And that's why I said the PIA took 20 years. And by the time we passed it, it was not just a watered down version. It had outlived most of its usefulness. It's still substantially useful, but most of it. So again, it's us. It comes down to us. We should talk more amongst ourselves. We should believe more in ourselves. And like I told you, you can't go too far to look at why we should believe in ourselves. I gave you the banking industry, I gave you telecoms, I gave you aviation. They are all being run by Nigerians. The foreigners will not come and do it for you. And that they've shown that time and time again. And if they come and do it for you, it's at a massive cost on your forex. So no matter how rich Dangote is, he will spend substantial part of his money in Nigeria, just like he would do with all the other rich folk who are contributing to the growth of this economy. We just need a mind shift. It's a mind shift that we need. I wouldn't lose too much sleep about IOCs divesting. It's a strategic decision on their part, which is fine. But whatever they are leaving, we should not allow a vacuum to exist. Sure. Which is the reason I like the policy that I say, leave, you must give it to local people who can produce it. And they're actually producing more from those assets that were capped for several years. That's it.
All right, sir, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, sir. So that brings us to the end of this section and overall the end of our time. So thank you so much, sir, for attending this interview with me. And I look forward to having you at subsequent interviews.
My pleasure.